Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Really excited about the podcast we have coming your way today. We're getting closer. Week 3, almost here. KU, UNLV. It is very weird to have KU playing a team it played literally, what is it going to be, twice in 4 games. And you think about this non-conference schedule for KU. I think it's pretty rare that you see a back-to-back years where you end up playing 2 of the same non-conference teams. Now, granted, one of them was in a bowl game, but just weird how the schedule is working out like that this year. On today's episode, we've got a couple things planned for you. We're going to talk to Jack Ritter, who is our student writer right now, helping us out at Fog.net. He does a great job with all of his written content. We're going to incorporate him in a lot more of these podcasts because he's got some really good perspective on KU and all things Jayhawks. And then later on in the podcast, I'll talk a little bit about recruiting, basketball recruiting, football recruiting, right? We're in that time of year now where it's going to be thick and fast, nonstop, with visits for both football and basketball. So without further ado, I'll bring in Jack. Jack, thanks a bunch for joining us. What
Super
what
happy
should
to be
KU
here.
fans know about you, Jack? What should KU fans know?
All right. Well, I'm a sophomore at KU. I'm a journalism major, and I grew up in Lawrence. So I went to a lot of fun, we'll put it that way, fun KU football games growing up. And yeah, super happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey, let's dive into this. I know you've been around some of the coaches this week, right? Listen to Lance Leipold. You were there with me on Tuesday for coordinators and players. This week's been kind of one of those where it's a mixed bag. Some weeks it's a lot of looking ahead to the next game. Like this time last week, I would have said, man, we did not talk very much about Lindenwood with Jeff Grimes, Brian Borland, and Lance Leipold. This week feels like it was a lot more talk about Illinois, what happened. Obviously, we've done a lot of talking on the podcast about Illinois, but hearing the coaches talk about Illinois and what happened and how they're moving on, Jack, what were some of the things that kind of stood out to you hearing those coaches talk?
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was pretty fascinating listening to the quick turnaround. Obviously, KU played a game on Saturday, and now they're going into a short week playing on Friday night. And so I thought it was really interesting to see how the coaching staff wanted to talk and wanted to mention the Illinois game stuff, but also wanted to get past it because it's such a short week. I mean, they got back early hours of Sunday morning and then had a practice on that Sunday, then had another practice on that Monday, and then got more into things with Tuesday and I assume Wednesday as well. So they've had a lot on their plates to turn around. I thought one of the most significant things that happened in that press conference was what Jeff Grimes said about legitimate, credible effort during practice. I thought it was pretty fascinating that instead of looking at game clips, he decided to look at practice clips with the offense.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because, and obviously, like Jeff Grimes watched the Illinois tape. Like,
Right.
let's be right about this, and I've seen some, I think, jumping to conclusions about that. But it is interesting that that's when you're meeting with the team and you've got such a brief period of time to talk about the Illinois game, right? And Grimes talked about some of the stats that KU had, right? They outgained Illinois. They were better, yards per play, like any offensive stat, right? KU was better except for turnovers. And I thought Grimes talking about practice habits was really interesting and how mistakes and practice can then bleed into the game. And I thought that was interesting considering the fact that KU was a veteran team, and that's not necessarily something I would think would happen in practice at this point in
Right.
time, but it can happen. I think something I forget sometimes too is like, look, it's still college, guys, and it's not going to be nailed on perfect every day. But the fact that then he was able to draw between, hey, we made this mistake in practice. Here's how this mistake played out in the game. That for me was like, I can understand why you'd want to show them that to say, hey, if we don't practice to the best of our ability every day and don't execute at practice, like this is how a mistake can bleed into a game, like the Jared Casey interception, right? Or the Jalen Daniels interception that came because Jared Casey missed a block on
Right.
the screen pass. So I think that stuff is really interesting. Anything else from Grimes stand out to you? I thought he was I think he's always interesting to listen to, but I thought this week in particular was an interesting press conference with him.
I think let's see, if I were in Jeff Grimes' shoes, I think I would have talked about the offensive line performance a bit more. I think that was one of the big questions, especially coming out of camp when Jeff Grimes said, like, we're not where we need to be at the tail end of camp. And then we went into that Illinois game with, thinking that was going to probably be one of the big storylines. But the O-line, he said the O-line had a good performance. They ran the ball into heavy boxes, and Neal and Highshaw played well. But the biggest thing that he said that really stuck out, or one of the other bigger things that stuck out, is when he just simply put it, I have to do a better job at getting them, Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw, the ball in crunch time. And I think fans will definitely know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I'll be fascinated to see, and maybe we can spin this forward a little bit later on when we're talking here, Jack, about the offense and what they might do against UNLV. But you're right, and I think taking that sort of accountability of I got to do a better job of that. Yeah, and I think you're right. You've got maybe one of the best running backs in college football, and maybe one of the best 1-2 punches in college football. Hammer it, and I can understand, right? Kevin and I talked about why the game plan played out the way it did in the game because of what Illinois did. But you look ahead and you're like, man, like ride those two until, the cows come home. I think hopefully that's the right saying. But it's just, this weekend, I'll be really fascinated to see what KU does on Friday night against UNLV. Before we get to that, I'm curious, Brian Borland, I thought the physicality that he talked about was interesting. Just the fact that I think about where this team has come from, right, in 2021 and even 2022, when it just felt like, man, these guys are getting bulldozed every single play by mediocre offensive lines, to now see it where you can go on the road and play a Big Ten team and be more physical than them in the defensive front and really control the game until the defense is on the field for 11 minutes in the fourth quarter. And I don't know who has the stamina to play 11 minutes, in a quarter and still hold their physical level. So what do you think of what Borland had to say?
Well, he kind of zeroed in on that fourth quarter. He said, the defense did a good job for the most part, but it was just that fourth quarter. Obviously, there are some things that weren't totally in the defense's control that kept them out on the field for 11 minutes. He said, Tommy Dunn was one of the best interior defensive guys that game, which I thought was pretty significant of him to say. He's had some inconsistency in the past, or some stuff that's sort of put up obstacles for his ability to really play well at KU. But it seems like, and it seemed like this coming out of camp as well, with some of the coaches mentioning his name week to week, but it seems like Tommy Dunn is going to put together a pretty good season.
And that's huge, right, for KU, considering what they lost with Devin Phillips and Gage Keys. And now you look at, DJ's still there, and I think he's going to be a guy that plays a lot. But you're looking for kind of that second, third guy. And Tommy Dunn, obviously Caleb Taylor as well, I thought had really good games. And now I feel like we can spin this forward a little bit and talk about UNLV's offense against KU's defense, because this is a game that if you looked at in the bowl game, right, I was looking at some of like the advanced numbers, and I kind of forgot how just crazy this game was from it. And not only like, okay, there are a lot of penalties. Jason Bean had the ultimate Jason Bean performance with, picks and touchdowns and deep throws, but UNLV's offense did a pretty good job of moving the ball against KU's defense. And I look at what UNLV is now, and we could talk about, I think, UNLV starting quarterback, right, Matthew Sluka. UNLV's old quarterback went to the portal. He went to USC. Actually not starting there, which I thought was really, really surprising, because I thought he would play pretty well in the bowl game. But now they've got Matthew Sluka, who's coming from Holy Cross. I mean, you want to talk about resumes of being a dual threat guy. He was a first team kind of all FCS guy, second leading rusher in Holy Cross history for a quarterback. I thought that when I read that this week, I was like, what in the world? And then you watch some of his tape, right? And it is a lot of those running clips. And I'm fascinated to see how KU deals with this, because I feel like running quarterbacks in the past have given KU some fits. But I feel like this matchup here of what Sluka offers is going to be really interesting for KU to deal with this weekend.
Yeah, I think the run aspect of Sluka's game is pretty interesting. Borland commented on it and said, he probably fits into that offense a little bit better than quarterback did last year because of that dual threat ability. I was looking at his stats in the first 2 games, and he actually had more carries than he did completions in each of the first 2 games. He in that first game he went or yeah, first game he went 8 of 17 for 161 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he also ran for 9 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown as well. And in their second game, 6 of 15 or 6 of 13, 71 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception, but 11 carries for 59 yards. So I don't think he's afraid to run the ball at all. When I looked at his Holy Cross tape, the first thing that stuck out to me was he is not afraid to run it on 3rd and long. Like it'll be 3rd and 7. He'll be surveying the field, see a gap, and take it.
And I feel like Jack, we've been in the press conferences, right? You hear Cornell Wheeler's name come up a lot, and he is someone that I think has impressed me through the first 2 weeks with the way he's played. Not only like putting guys in the right position as the middle linebacker, but legitimately just what he's offered in terms of his athleticism. And this, for me, feels like a game where kind of that matchup between Cornell and Sluka in terms of that quarterback run game. I think Wheeler's athleticism in this one is going to be really, really important, because if I think back to years past and what has allowed other kind of mobile quarterbacks to have success, I think it's the lack of athleticism at that middle linebacker spot. And now you look at KU with Cornell and what he offers. I think that's going to be a really fascinating matchup. What else? So I'm really interested in this game is the speed that UNLV has, right? They've got Ricky White, All-American, wide receiver, really great player. But DeJesus, for me, watching that Houston game, really flashed with his speed and what he offers. And so I think for KU now, it's going to be, hey, how do you contain the quarterback? And then how do you match up, with White and DeJesus? Like, those are 2 guys that offer different they pose different questions to a defense. And I love the way that their offensive coordinator puts those guys in positions to have success. You were there talking to Mello actually about that. What did Mello have to say about going against, Ricky White?
He said, I'm pretty sure Ricky had some preseason honors, that he was earning. And Mello said, he's just excited to play. Mello keeps it pretty low key, as you know. And I think he was just I think he's just looking forward to the matchup. He wants to show off his own play. But I don't think he's super nervous about Ricky.
And look, you go against a lot of the wide receivers you've seen. Think about someone like Xavier Worthy last year at Texas, in that Texas game, and the way that KU, for the most part, was able to kind of keep him under wraps. These guys have gone against really good wide receivers. And I think that matchup on the outside is going to be really, really interesting. Let's transition to the other side of the ball. I think the side everyone's more interested to watch on Friday night. What are you hoping to see from the offense, against UNLV?
One of the things that stuck out when we were speaking with the coaches is that I'm pretty sure Jeff Grimes said that their front plays kind of with this chaotic mantra, is what he said. Is they're just going to hit the gap and they're not going to stay blocked. They're just going to keep finding ways to get at the guys. So, when I look at how the KU offense needs to deal with this is how composed are they going to be? We've seen some sloppiness, right? Lindenwood, a little bit sloppy in the beginning, before improvement. Last game against Illinois, definitely some sloppiness. So I think a lot of it falls on the offensive line and even on those running backs blocking for Jalen when he needs time to throw the ball. Is how are you going to deal with that really sort of chaotic front 7?
Yeah, and I think this is a game where we saw in the bowl game, UNLV went out of their way to stack the box and really, really limit Devin Neal. And they had success, right? It's the game that, Jason B needed to throw the ball a bunch. I think they'll probably take the same approach, and I'm fascinated to see how you can take the lessons from Illinois, right, when they did stack the box and made it look like, hey, you should throw on these downs. Why wouldn't UNLV do the same thing and follow what they did in the bowl game and try and force KU to throw the ball? I'll be fascinated if they do that. How does KU and how does Jeff Grimes, right? How do you pivot? And they'll know what's coming, right? If UNLV goes with 8 guys in the box, like Jeff Grimes isn't going to be there like, oh, didn't expect this. Like,
Right.
UNLV showed in the bowl game what they want to do. And I think for me, like, yes, offensive line, based on what they showed against Illinois, should be able to control the point of attack in this one. But it's just a different look now, right, with what UNLV wants to do. And you're right. Like, if you watch the games, they do want to play with some chaos factor in there. And KU's going to have to contend with that. Jack, I'm curious, like, overall, what's your vibe check on this game? I feel like there is a sense of maybe nervousness for some people. Some people feel confident. I'm probably somewhere in between. How do you feel about this?
The thing that I think KU fans should rest in is the fact that there are 30 seniors on this roster. And I think in years past for KU, a game like the Illinois game could really derail a lot. And because, in the past, pre-Leipold, how does KU deal with adversity? And the answer was they don't really have one. They don't really have an answer to that. But, we've seen this experience from these players and from these coaches that I think they'll use to be able to bounce back quick. I think fans should be glad that for this short week game, for this quick turnaround, there are seniors who care. There are players on this roster who really care and want to put that effort forward. My vibe check is, KU is done with all the nonsense, lots of expectations and things like that. And maybe it got to them a little bit and maybe it made some of their practices sloppy. Who knows? But I think they're just going to be very focused going into this game. And I think they're going to try and get a lot of energy going. We saw KU roll out early in the week. We're going to wear black uniforms and we want fans to do the blackout stuff too. I don't really remember in years past when they've said early in the week, we're going to wear these jerseys, come match with us and match our energy.
Yeah, you're right. That has been a later in the week type of thing. And even for the K-State game and for the Illinois game last year, I know Illinois for sure, they tried to market it as a blackout, but there wasn't any sort of coordinated effort. Hey, we're providing shirts. We're providing this. And KU's definitely doing that for the game this weekend. I think you're right, though, on this being Illinois almost being a wake-up call. That's something Devin Neal hit on a little bit post-game, was the fact that you go into the season hearing about how great you are, and you roll Lindenwood, granted with some mistakes, but you roll them, and you're feeling good about yourself. And then you go on the road to Illinois, thinking, we got this. We got it. And then all of a sudden you realize, man, like you got to show up and do it. Just because you have the preseason accolades, the confidence, the seniors, the talent, doesn't mean that's all going to translate to a win or a convincing performance. And I thought that was really interesting from what Devin said. I think it's a really good point by you that we'll see, I think, on Friday night if Illinois was a wake-up call or not. Because if they come out and they execute and they're sharp and they play at their highest level, this is a game that I think KU should be able to control. But if there's some of that sloppiness, the hesitation, even a dwindling of confidence, just the slightest bit, like you'll be able to see it on the field because we've seen what this team looks like when it's brimming with confidence and full of it. So I'm really interested for this one, Jack. I think this game has turned from one where I think in the preseason we're like, they play UNLV again, like whatever. And now it's like, man, this is a big game. I feel like we're going to learn some stuff about KU, maybe not so much like on the field, the talent, because we've seen that, but the mentality. And I think mentality is going to be a huge part for KU this year and being able to stay to it. So thanks a bunch, Jack. That was fun. We'll have you on a lot more as the games keep coming fast. For folks that aren't following you on Twitter, where can they find you?
Twitter is at Jack RRITT. There we go.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Jack. We'll talk to you again probably next week.
See ya.
All right, we can transition now to some high school recruiting. First and foremost, football, challenging weekend. KU plays on a Friday night. Friday nights are big for high school football games. So the visit list, again, going to be small. KU has one visitor coming in from IMG Academy in Florida. They play Thursday night, so that means he'll be able to be on campus for the game on Friday. On the basketball front, one big visitor coming to campus this weekend, and that is Sebastian Williams Adams, a 4-star power forward currently lives in Houston. He is someone that KU's been recruiting for a long time now. I looked back. I was writing a preview for VIP subscribers on this recruitment. Hey, where KU sits, all that good stuff. And KU offered him back in the summer of 2023. So you're talking about a long time that KU's been pursuing him. He was on campus back in January for an unofficial visit. I believe it was when KU was it was when the students were on break. So it was a little bit of a weird time, but he's someone too that his mom has lived in, I believe it's Wichita for a good while now. So there's a certain connection of being able to have someone that's a little bit closer to home, someone, right? Texas, KU has had plenty of success recruiting high school basketball players from the state of Texas. And he's another one that I think KU is in a really good spot with. As you can see, though, right, loaded visit schedule. He's already been to Texas A&M, already been to Auburn. He'll see KU, and he's got other visits scheduled afterwards to Purdue, SMU, Oklahoma State. Baylor supposedly is supposed to get on that visit list as well. So this is one that, KU's got some competition, but it's one of those where you just look at the signs, right? A guy KU's been on for a long time, has already been to campus, does have a family member that's lived in Wichita, and it just checks a lot of the boxes of what you're probably looking for in a player. On the court, he's someone that is a really smart basketball player. You talk to people that have seen him in person. He is a good athlete, a physical player, isn't maybe the most polished player on the perimeter in terms of his shooting, right? The expectation was, hey, can this guy improve his three-point shooting? Hasn't exactly done that, but he's someone that can score. He can create, kind of your equivalent of like a much more, probably more skilled than a KJ Adams, but maybe not quite as well-rounded as like an older Jalen Wilson, but probably somewhere in between. But a really intriguing prospect, and KU's going to have him on campus for a visit this weekend. So that's what we got. Thanks as always for tuning into the Fog.net podcast. Got plenty more coverage on the website at fog.net. We will have plenty of post-game coverage for you on Friday night after KU against UNLV. Obviously, headed throughout all the weekend. We'll have plenty of intel on Sebastian Williams' Adams visit, how things are going with football recruiting. So make sure you're always staying tuned to the website. And as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. Those go a long way. If you're watching on YouTube, please like the videos, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell right next to this subscribe button. You will get notifications every time we post. That means player interviews, coach interviews, podcast interviews, all that good stuff. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you all after KU against UNLV.